Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about Egypt's democratic future, and why the country continues to score very low in international democracy rating, like the Freedom House. My presentation is called "Security or Liberty: Egypt's Democratic Future." I chose Egypt because it's one of the clearest examples of how difficult the democratic transition can become after political instability. Egypt is a country that experienced massive democratic protests during the Arab Spring of 2011. But instead of becoming a stronger democracy, the government became more centralized and authoritarian over time. The rest presentation will explain why Egypt's democracy score is low, how ideas from political theorists like Hobbes, Locke, and Aristotle help explain Egypt's situation, and what realistic reform Egypt could make to become more democratic in the future while still maintaining stability. What makes a democracy? Democracy is much more than simply holding elections every few years, according to the Freedom House. Democracy also requires civil liberties, political participation, accountability, freedom of speech, and a rule of law. Several philosophers we studied this semester help explain these theories. John Locke believes that government only gains legitimacy through the consent of the governed, and that governments must protect natural rights like liberty and freedom. If governments fail to protect rights, Locke believes citizens have a right to challenge that government. Aristotle also argues that good government serves the common good rather than only serving rulers or elites. These ideas are important because each technically holds elections, but many democratic institutions remain weak or restricted. This shows that democracy involves much more than simply voting. Egypt currently scores very low in international democracy ratings, is classified by the Freedom House as not free. The Egyptian government places major restrictions on opposition parties, journalists, activists, and political protests. Although elections exist, critics argue they are not fully fair or competitive because opposition candidates face major disadvantages. Freedom House evaluates countries using categories such as political rights, freedom of expression, judicial independence, and civil liberties. Egypt scores poorly in many of these categories because political power is heavily concentrated in the executive branch and the military. This demonstrates one of the major themes of our course. Democracy depends not only on elections, but also on institutions that limit power and protect individual rights. In 2011, Egypt became one of the most important countries involved in the Arab Springs. Large protests erupted in Cairo Terra Square, where citizens demanded democracy, political freedom, an economic opportunity, an end to corruption, and authoritarian rule. President Hosni Mubarak resigned after decades in power, and many people believed Egypt was entering a new democratic era. According to the Abzal article, The Arab Spring's Fourth Wave, many observers viewed these uprisings as a part of the new global wave of democratization. However, the democratic transition quickly became unstable. Political divisions increased, economic conditions worsened, and security concerns grew throughout the country. As instability increased, many Egyptians became more concerned about restoring order and stability rather than continuing rapid democratic reform. This situation connects closely to the political theory of Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes argued that people are often willing to accept stronger centralized authority when they fear disorder, instability, or violence. In his view, governments exist primarily to maintain order and prevent chaos. After the Arab Springs, Egypt experienced political unrest, protests, economic powers, and security concerns. Many citizens became worried that instability would seriously damage their country. Because of this, support increased for stronger government authority and military involvement in politics. This created a major tension between liberty and security. On one hand, democratic freedoms are extremely important. On the other hand, government also needs enough stability to function effectively. Egypt demonstrates how society sometimes sacrifices democratic freedoms when they fear instability or insecurity. One major reason Egypt's democracy score remains low is the concentration of political power. Today, the presidency and the military hold enormous influence over Egyptian politics, while groups and independent institutions remain relatively weak. This connects to Wan's Liz article, The Perils of Presidentialism. Lin argues that presidential systems can become unstable when too much authority becomes concentrated in one leader or institution. Levinsky and Ziblack also explain how democracies die, that modern democracies often decline gradually rather than collapsing suddenly. Instead of military coups alone, democratic erosion now often happens when leaders we when oh sorry, often happens when leaders weaken institutions, reduce political competition, and limit opposition voices over time. In Egypt, democratic institutions remain weak because executive authority and military influence dominates the political system. Civil liberty challenges. Another major issue in Egypt involves restrictions on civil liberties and human rights. Civil liberties include freedoms such as speech, protest, journalism, and political expression. These rights are essential because citizens need to be able to criticize government's actions and participate freely in politics. In Egypt, journalists, activists, and opposition figures often face censorship, arrest, or restrictions. This connects directly to Locke's argument that governments lose legitimacy when they fail to protect individual rights. Without strong protection for free expression and political participation, citizens cannot fully hold leaders accountable. As a result, democratic legitimacy weakens because people lose trust in political institutions and feel excluded from meaningful participation. Economic conditions also play a major role in Egypt's democratic struggles. Egypt faces severe challenges, including unemployment, poverty, and economic inequality. Many young people struggle to find stable jobs or economic opportunity. This connects to Amartya Sen's book, Development as Freedom. Sen argues that democracy and development are closely connected. Political freedom, economic opportunity, and social stability often reinforce each other. When economic conditions become difficult, governments frequently prioritize short-term stability and security over democratic reform. Economic frustration can also increase distrust towards political institutions and make citizens feel less confident that the democracy will improve their lives. This demonstrates that successful democracies depend not only on political institutions, but also on economic development and trust. If Egypt wants to improve its democracy score realistically, several gradual reforms could strengthen the democratic institutions while still maintaining stability. First, Egypt could strengthen judicial independence so the courts are better able to limit the abuse of the power and enforce constitutional protections. Independent courts are essential because they help maintain rule of law and prevent government from becoming too powerful. Second, elections can also become more transparent and competitive through international election observers and stronger protection for opposition candidates and parties. Third, anti-corruption reform can improve public trust in government institutions. Corruption weakens democracy because citizens lose confidence that political systems are fair and accountable. These reforms will not immediately create a perfect democracy overnight, but they will gradually improve legitimacy and political participation. Egypt can also strengthen democracy by expanding civil society and protecting political participation. Jane Manbridge argues that democratic systems should encourage citizen participation and representation. Political scientist Schneider also argues that political parties are essential because they organize democratic competition and help citizens participate politically. In Egypt, stronger opposition parties should be allowed to compete more freely. The government can also improve protections for journalists and independent media organizations. Citizens have more reliable access to communication. Free expression and political competition are essential for democratic accountability because citizens need open debate in order to make informed political decisions. Encouraging civic participation and expanding political freedoms will help strengthen democratic culture over time. Egypt can also learn from democratic institutions used in other countries. For example, South Africa's constitution strongly protects civil liberties and governmental power through constitutional rights and judicial review. India's federal system distributes power across different states, which prevents excessive concentration of authority in one national institution or leader. Federalism can also strengthen democracy because power is divided amongst multiple levels of government. Egypt does not need to copy another country exactly, but studying successful democratic institutions elsewhere can provide useful models for reform and accountability. Despite these possible reforms, Egypt will still face major opposition to democratization. The military remains one of the most powerful institutions in the country and may resist reforms that reduce its political influence. Security concerns also remain extremely important. Regional stability, terrorism, economic pressures make many leaders cautious about rapid political change. Political polarization and distrust can also make democratic compromise more difficult. Because of these challenges, rather, gradual reforms is probably more realistic than sudden revolutionary change. This demonstrates that democratization is not usually a slow and difficult process that requires long institutional development and public trust. In conclusion, Egypt's low democracy score represents concentrated political power, weak civil liberties, limited political competition, and strong executive authority. While the Arab Springs created hope for democratization, instability and security concerns eventually strengthened centralized government control instead. However, Egypt still has a possible pathways to stronger democracy. Gradual reforms involving, like I mentioned earlier, independent courts, fairer elections, stronger civil liberties, anti-corruption measures, and expanded political participation could also improve the democratic legitimacy over time. This presentation demonstrates one of the major lessons from our course. Democracy requires much more than elections alone. Successful democracies depend on institutions that protect rights, limit power, encourage participation, and maintain public trust. Thank you.